It is 21 February 2024, and I'm joined by Mr. David Eicher, future doctor, maybe.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Hey, thanks for being here with us today. So I'm going to quickly read your bio, and then we're going to have a conversation.
Okay.
You ready for it?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, so education and a calling to Christian service has been a part of David Eicher's life for as long as he can remember. He graduated from Allegheny Wesleyan College in 2009 with a BA in Pastoral Ministries. After graduating, he taught middle school for a total of 9 years while also running an educational consulting business that helped small private religious schools throughout the United States and Canada develop intervention programs to identify and remediate children with dyslexia and other reading difficulties. He is currently in a master's program at the University of Mount Union for an M.Ed in educational leadership. Did you finish that?
Yeah, I did finish that.
Yeah,
so update my bio.
You got to update your bio. All right. Coming to Sattler has been a long-time dream for David, and he is thrilled to be part of the team here. Any additions, subtractions from that part? No,
been everything I hoped it would be.
All right.
So, yeah, absolutely. I think I wrote this my first week here or something like that, and my feelings haven't changed since then. Being here has been everything that I hoped it would be.
So you started like a year and change ago now.
It's getting close to 2 years. June will be 2 years.
I knew that. David and his wife Triva and his son Pascal, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Pascal, moved from rural southeastern Ohio to urban Boston, and they absolutely love it here in this busy, fascinating, fun city. They love sitting in the Museum of Fine Arts, the Boston Aquarium, riding the Charlestown Ferry, and experiencing the incredibly diverse culture here. David's hobbies include collecting and playing strategy board games. He has over 200 of them. We have to talk about this.
Yeah, we talk about this.
He also loves singing, theology, and puns. All right. There's a lot there, a lot of me. Any additions, subtractions before I move on?
So far, so good.
All right. David has 2 roles here at Sattler, Director of Student Services and Registrar. His job is to keep track of all the student records and documentation, oversee the work program for the students, and develop class schedules that work for everyone. That's a hard job, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah, the most important part of his job is to support the success of every student by helping them get access to the resources that they need. Thanks for being here.
Love being here.
So I'm going to start with the juicy part of your bio and maybe work backwards. But where did your love of strategy board games develop, and where do you keep 200 board games?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult, 900 square foot apartment. I have a wall in my living room of bookshelves, so we have those there. I don't think people become gamers. I think people are born gamers, and they just discover it then. We were at a yard sale when I was a kid, probably, I'm going to say I might have been in my late preteens, 12, 13. I might have been as old as 14, and there was this game there. I didn't even know this kind of game existed. It was called Frederick the Great, and it was about the campaigns of Frederick during the War of Austrian Succession. It had all these tiny cardboard squares. Now I know they're called counters, with like numbers and pictures on them, and then a map with a hexagon-shaped spaces to move these pieces around. And in my early teens, I didn't have anybody that knew how to play these games. I'm trying to figure out how to play it from the rule book. I don't think I've ever actually played the game and played it according to the correct rules. I could never get anybody to do it. But I discovered this whole world existed. And that has been interest. The world of board games,
like niche board games.
Yeah, niche board games. Yeah, everybody knows about Monopoly and Risk and so on. But like to discover, and then as an adult discovering there's conventions. I used to go every year or so to a convention. It's called Origins in Columbus, and people would come from Wednesday to Sunday, and like 15,000 people would come. This whole convention hall full of people playing games and so on. And it's a way of exploring the world. It's a way of understanding the world that we live in. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy it so much. I usually have one of 2 directions that I'll go. I'll either discover a new topic that I'm interested in and then seek out board games about that. Like right now, one of the things I'm super interested in is the political upheaval in Russia in the early 1900s. And for some reason, Soviet Russia has lately just really fascinated me. And so I've sought out are there games out there that simulate some of these these political things that happened. And then the flip side will also happen.
Are there?
There are. Well, there's one called Kremlin, which is a little bit of a social deduction game. Everybody secretly identifies the strengths of certain political figures in this game, and then as the game is played out, you start revealing, well, I'm actually the one that he's loyal to, based on the numbers that you've given him before. And so there's this like guessing: am I actually going to be able to do, or are people going to be able to come through for me? No, but it's very much like a social deduction game. There's one called Descent into Chaos, which I just picked up, and it's about how the fall of the Tsar and how Russia goes from being this relatively stable, although there were a lot of issues and protests and things, into this spinning out into a chaotic state that eventually leads to the rise of Joseph Stalin and the purges of the 20s and 30s. And I find those kind of things interesting to see simulated, because it can show us not only what did happen, but what could have happened, other directions things could have taken. There's one that I was actually reading about last night that I'm being severely tempted. Obviously, my budget doesn't allow the continual procurement of more games. I already have 200, but maybe somebody help me out with. It's called The White Tribe. And it's about Rhodesia, and I didn't even know anything about Rhodesia, like
South Africa.
Yeah, and it was an apartheid state back. Like the only country that's also apartheid is South Africa, and it dissolved into chaos as the white minority is trying to suppress the black majority, and eventually that's untenable, and the whole country collapses in civil war and violence. And this game takes places you as a player in the position of a prime minister who's trying to move from this apartheid state to a more equitable state while also maintaining the political stability, which means you're having to make compromises over the course. So you can't be too progressive, because if you're too progressive, then you don't get reelected and everything, falls, the government falls and so on. And so like trying to thread this needle of looking and seeing how the world should be and how it is right now, and that practical balance between the two. And I find those kinds of things just incredibly fascinating to play and engage with, because we all find ourselves in those kind of situations. Like we see how things should be, and we have this conversation. We have this conversation about the Sermon on the Mount. Well, if everybody did that, well, what would happen? And so we're all face the realities of the world we live in that we don't always know. Is this really the How do we live out and bring about the world that we wish it was, that we know it should be, and still deal with the practicalities of where we are and what people are able to receive and so on? And I even think that's something God, through his progressive revelation, did as well, is taking people where they're at and bringing us through ultimately the revelation of Christ.
All right. So I'm going to ask some quick questions, and we'll change topic.
Yeah, sure.
I know there are like probably categories of games you recommend to people.
Oh, yeah.
This for this, this for that.
Oh, for sure.
Do you have any like recommendations for anyone listening on some of the I wouldn't ask you your top 5, because I'm sure that would be too hard for you.
Yeah.
I could say like top 5, or I was going to ask, what's a game for community building? What's a game for your family?
Yeah.
What's a game for...
One game that I think is great for, and every game is on some level group dependent, but Concept is a great game. Concept is it's almost more of an activity than a game, but it almost never fails. If I start playing with a small group of people, other people come and get involved. And it's essentially a guessing game. The player who's leading the game, or whoever's turn it is trying to get everyone else to guess a word, or in some cases a phrase, and they're not allowed to say anything but the word yes. And there's a board that's a grid with all kinds of pictures and symbols on it, and you're placing cubes on these to help guide people's thinking into how these ideas. You're creating groups of ideas, and then everyone's trying to guess what it is. And so that's a really fun group activity. Any number of people can play it. And, you could just take turns drawing cards. Sometimes people just like to think up their own idea of what they want people to guess. And that's a simple one to learn. It's, like I said, it's almost more of an activity than a game. But that's a great one. That's one I recommend. One that I've been playing a lot lately that I really, really like is called BIOS Origins. And it's about the development of human civilization A lot of times, games like that are about conflict, which conflict happens. But this game is a lot more based around the ideas. So you have cards that you can buy that represent ideas that are like major ideas in human development. Everything from the internet to petroleum-based cars to singing. And these ideas basically form foundational ideas within your nation or your culture. And then it enables you to do different actions. So so it's not just about military conflict. In fact, that happens less. There's also religious conflict that you're able to send. You're basically evangelize the other nations and bring them into your culture. Or there's other forms of conflict. And so I find that really interesting to tell the human story, not from this idea of conquerors and nations and military power, but in this idea of this ideas that cultures share. Or and it's a very interesting story that the game tells every time I play it.
Okay. I'm guess if I ask you that in a year, you probably will change the answer.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's try to jump back. How does that relate to your Pastoral Ministries passions? I'm just kidding. So you've gone through a little bit of school, and then you've been in education too. So master's degree. You taught for 9 years at a middle school. Why education? And
so there are 4 boys in my family.
Okay.
I've got 2 older brothers. They're 11 months apart, and then there's a 9-year gap, and there's me. So it's like 2 different families. And of the 4 boys in my family, I like to say I got the double portion of my father's spirit.
Okay.
My father was an editor for Rod and Staff. My whole life he worked from home, which was kind of unusual in our community. Mm-hmm. And he'd go up to his office every day. And I realize now as an adult, the kind of discipline that took to treat going upstairs to his office like a job. Nobody's there checking on him. Nobody's making sure he does it. He's in charge of his own schedule. And he's going, and working, doing textbooks. If you have a Rod and Staff English series, you have the Rod and Staff Math series, you can look in the front cover there, the acknowledgments of my dad, Marvin Eicher, his name is there. And so that's the kind of things we talked about. You talked shop, dads talk shop with their kids. And so we talked about things like verb tenses and how words work and what sentences, we'd read stories and we talk about how this story could have been better if the words had been chosen differently or what about the plot. And so this was just a big part of my family culture. My oldest brother works as a I think he does accounting for a business in Southern Ohio, and then my second oldest brother Chris and my younger brother Ryan work together in a tire shop, and I'm involved in education. So I'm the one that I feel like really took that and continued kind of the life trajectory that my dad did. So I was always interested in going to college, and I didn't know anything about going to college. I didn't know even where you would begin to start. I was the first person in my church to go to college, the first person in my family. And I will never forget one of the really formative experiences that nudged me along that way. I worked with a man named Jason Weaver, and he was I was doing carpet. I was just his gopher. I'm like 16 or 17, just trying to figure out what I'm doing in my life. And we were in this ratty old bathroom in New Philly, Ohio, and we're just chatting while we're working. I'm running down, getting tools for him, helping him haul whatever. And he looks at me, sitting there in a tub working on tile, and he looks at me and he says something along the lines of, "You've got a good brain. You don't need to be doing this. You don't need to be laying carpet. You should, if you're interested in going to college, you need to pursue that. You need to make something happen." And for somebody who I had a lot of respect for, to look at me and see that.
How old were you again?
I was probably 16 or 17 at the time. And like encourage that, because there was a lot of discouragement of those ideas in the community where I was. It's like, well, that's not, there's like 3 or 4 work options and that's it. And so to have somebody who did one of those work options look at me and say, no, there's actually a bigger world for you. There's actually something else you could be doing. That just absolutely meant a lot. So I wasn't sure what to do, where to go. And this is a whole other long story, take up the whole podcast just to tell this little piece of my story. But I'll try to summarize. I came into came into contact with the Conservative Holiness people, which is a Wesleyan, basically it's the Wesleyan tradition, the Conservative Holiness movement. We had, in 2000, which would have been when I was 14, a family started sending their kids to our school, and we got to be really good friends with them. We stayed in touch. They invited us to come to their youth camp. So I went to their youth camp that year, and then they moved away. We kind of lost touch with the people there at the camp. And the year I was 17, on a whim, I decided to go visit that church that we used to go to once in a while when my friends lived there. And it happened to be the Sunday before their youth camp. And they said, well, come back next Sunday and we'll take you to youth camp again. I said, I'd love to do that. So my brother and I went. And the president of the college that I would end up attending was the evangelist there at the camp. And he took an interest in me and kind of did what you do, going out recruiting students. And he stayed in touch with me. And I ended up going to school then to college that fall. And I've always felt a drawing. As long as I can remember, I felt a drawing to ministry. And I don't like the word calling. I think calling is too strong. I never felt like, some people, they know exactly what they want to do. I've never known exactly what I wanted to do, but I did know that there was some type of service to Christ that went beyond just, we're all servants of Jesus, but I always felt like there was something more, and I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And so I was just trying to follow that. So I ended up going to college, pursuing a degree. At the time, I thought I'd be a pastor in that denomination. That was kind of the direction I wanted to go. God made it clear that wasn't really the course he wanted for me, but I felt like he'd opened the doors to go to college there. And so I did. And I was a senior my last semester, and not sure what I'm going to do now. I talk to seniors here and I'm like, I remember being you, I remember all those questions that I don't know. But I had a friend named Jimmy, and he had a little bit of a hard time with some of his classes, and he was asking me. He said, "Could you help me study for this test? Could you help me, get prep for this?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I know. Here's what I would do in that case. Here's how I would approach that." And he comes back to me later. He's like, "I tried some of your stuff. It worked. It was great. I felt really good about the test. I got a good grade on it, whatever." And I realized that's what I want to do. That's I love that sense of building a bridge. Here's where somebody is and here's where they want to be, and figuring out how to build a bridge between here and there. And so that's become a kind of a defining thing of what I find in my life as I look back. And my first time in Boston, I met Finney, and I'd heard who Finney was and knew who Finney was, but kind of intimidated to actually meet him. And he asked me, what's your life's passion? And I was like if you on your computer, the little wheel that spins, as it's loading, and I wasn't sure what to say. And I stumbled something, I don't know, but I went home and I thought about it, and to crystallize that. And I think the best way that I could describe it is there's a song, I'm Working the Road. I don't know if you know the song, I'm Working the Road to Make It Easy for Those Behind. And it talks about how it's, the path to heaven. We're all seeking to enter into heaven, into the ultimate rest. And so I'm doing my best to reach the home of the blessed and make it easy for those behind. And that I think that's, if I would sum up what I want to be as a person, who I want to be as a person, I would be the kind of person that wherever I'm going, what I'm doing is making it easier for people that follow me to follow Jesus than it was for me. And I think that's another theme that runs through my life, because my mom wasn't raised in a Christian home. My mom was raised in a very, my mom's family was wild mountain people. You read the stories of the stills up in the mountains. That was my mom. That explains why, right? Just kidding. That explains why, as a Lyft driver told me, he said, "Where are you from?" And I told him, he said, "Oh, I could hear the guitar in your voice." That happened a little after, but that's where, if you hear a little Southern accent, that's where it comes from. Is my mom's family was from the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, and sometime, and I don't know who it was. I won't know until I hopefully meet him in the Holy City. Somebody went up to Hollow, where my mom's family lived, and knocked on the door and invited them kids to come to church. And Mom started going to church. Some others in her family did too, but she stuck it out. She saw people that had something she wanted, and her family opposed it. Her mom would tell her she wasn't allowed to go to church. Her mom would, She went to church, to wear the coverings with the strings. Her mom would take her covering, cut the strings off, tell her quit wearing a strainer pad on your head, and all these things, And mom's as a 16, 17, 18-year-old girl is sticking with this and saying, I want to go with God. It doesn't matter if anybody else is going. I want to go with God. And because of that, because of her desire and her faithfulness, it's easier for me to serve Jesus than it was for her. And now I have a son, and hopefully it's easier for him to make decisions because of the life that I live. So I feel like I have a responsibility, not just for myself, but for what's been given me to pass it on to other people. And so I view my work here at Sattler as an extension of that, that whatever I can do to look at these young people that are here and say, what can I do to help you to be faithful to Jesus and whatever he's called you to do, I think is another huge strand that just has run through my life as one of my big motivations.
Yeah. Your son has a unique name. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about how you and your wife chose Pascal?
There's two reasons, and we chose the English pronunciation Pascal because it's a reference to Easter.
As opposed to the
Pascal.
Which
is it's the French pronunciation,
okay.
Yeah, and he's named after Blaise Pascal, but we chose the English pronunciation because I really like the Easter connection, the Paschal feast and so on. But Blaise Pascal is somebody who I feel a lot of affinity for because he's incredibly gifted, incredibly talented, even as a young man. His dad's a tax collector, and he realized his dad spent all his time doing these figures to add these things up. So he invents a physical mechanical calculator as his teenager, the first mechanical calculator in the world, And so he's like really gifted, really talented on a scientific, intellectual level. And he struggles with faith because he likes stuff to make sense. He likes to figure things out. And at some point in his life, he has this epiphany where God reveals himself to him in some indescribable way. And Pascal writes this down. He calls it the testimony or the confession. And he actually keeps a copy of this testimony sewed in the lining of his clothes for the rest of his life. Wow. And he describes this experience. He says, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, not the God of the philosophers. And like he has this intense experience with God, and he realizes this isn't something about figuring it out. And so that becomes a major component of his philosophy, is that ultimately reason can take us so far, and we can try to figure it out. We can try to cross all the dots, cross all the T's and dot all the I's and all these things. But ultimately, we have to look and say, I have to believe in something. I must believe in something. And so we place our faith in something that we don't have complete like head knowledge or confidence in from I can have it all figured out from A to Z concept. And I find that really inspiring. And I find that's where I've had to come many times in my life is, Lord, I don't understand. I can't figure this all out. I don't know. And there's questions that I have. I'll probably die with more questions unanswered than I have answered. But I look at Jesus Christ, and I have faith in him, and I believe in him, and I do that knowing that, as someone says, I'm condemned to be free, and I must make some choice. Or Pascal says that in his famous wager: you must choose. Right. You must have some choice to believe. And so here's why you should choose Christ. And so that's my hope for my son. I remember when he was a baby, rocking him and singing. One of my favorite songs is "Come Gracious Spirit." And the second verse, "The light of truth to us display. Make us know and choose thy way. Plant holy fear in every heart that we from God may ne'er depart." And I remember singing that song again and again to him, plant that God, and just begging God that he would plant that fear, because that's what I want for him, is that God would put something in him that steers him toward God. We can do so much. We can try to do all the things right. And ultimately, it's a work of God that he does in our hearts that we've got to respond to, that, in faith. And so I see Pascal as a rebuke to the rationalism of his time, that we can have everything figured out. I think it's so easy to do that. It's really easy to do that in an academic environment, to think, we like our data and we like all these things. But ultimately, there's something mysterious, something magical, if you will, that has to happen, that's above all of our planning and all of our thinking, that underlies it all. And that, to me, is what Pascal was striking at. And that's what I want for my son. That's my prayer for my son, is that he can find that same thing.
I want to ask, kind of have two follow-up conversations. When I forget when I learned this, somebody also mentions that Pascal invented net present value calculations. Have you heard this?
I'm not sure if I have.
So there's this calculation you make called NPV, or net present value. And when I was learning it, the teacher, it was in a secular environment, said it was actually invented by a religious man called Blaise Pascal, where you multiply the amount by the probability, and then you add up all the sum product to get the net present value of an investment. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so Pascal's wager, I actually think we don't talk about it enough in apologetics. Do you know it well enough to
Yeah,
explain
I'm familiar.
You don't have to lay it out, but what is his famous wager, and walk us through it?
Yeah, so basically the claim he's making is either there's a God or there isn't.
Right.
And so you have two options. You can believe that there's a God, or you cannot. And so that creates a matrix. Either you believe in a God and act accordingly, and it turns out there isn't one. You believe in God and there is one. You don't believe and there is one, or you don't believe and there isn't one. And so then his calculation is, so if you believe in God and it turns out there isn't one, you'll be dead and you won't know it. So it's not that, you might be a little bit, you forego some pleasures, you forego some things that you could have had, but in the end, you'll be dead and it won't matter.
So the worst case scenario is you believe in the Bible and you follow it and you miss out on some sort of earthly pleasure that the Bible, I'll just use the word, prohibits.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term.
Yeah, you deny yourself and you follow Christ, and it turns out that wasn't
your life is just not as fun.
Right, not as great as it would have been, or maybe you're martyred, you lay down your life, but at the end of the time you're gone, and so there is no life to come. You don't know it. You've lost some type of finite value. On the other hand, if you believe in God and it turns out that your belief is well placed, there's infinite value, because you receive life and eternity with Christ and so on, and you have so there's the proposition. On the flip side, if you fail to believe in him and there's not, your outcome is the same. You have a small temporal gain because you had some things that hey, you live for yourself instead of living for others, or whatever. You live for yourself instead of living for him. So that's great. You gained that. But in the end, once again, you're dead, and there's that's it. You had your experience, and now it's gone. But ultimately, if you say there isn't one, and turns out that there is, now you've lost an infinite value, because you die, and then you face the judgment of what you should have done and you chose not to. So ultimately, the wise thing to do with the
net present value
is that you should choose to believe in him, because that provides you the best probability with the best outcomes. So that's his logical rationale in walking through that.
I heard my calculus teacher in high school laid out Pascal's wager. I think it was like a junior in high school. And I remember sitting there being very compelled by that wager. I was a little bit teetering on, at that point in my, I think as a 17-year-old, thinking to myself, interesting. But you said something interesting where there's something mysterious about God, and it's not like data-based or logic-based. But the that I have is, I actually think the belief in God is very, very logical.
Absolutely.
And I'm probably, my siblings can tell you this, I'm probably more on the, we wish you were more mysterious sack and not so logic-driven, and kind of thought more spiritually. But I guess the question I have, just following up more about a commentary on current society, on like someone like Blaise Pascal, and I've been talking to our biologist about this question. what has happened that the leaders of someone like Blaise Pascal, who invents the first calculator, he's doing all of this. He's doing mathematics, sort of a leading edge thinker, comes up with a strong belief in God. And that was like the lead thinkers were all finding God through, I'll just call it the academy, right? Not through the academy, but it supported the belief in God. Now, it feels like, I'm not an anthropologist, but it almost seems like there's been a reversal.
Yeah.
And the new priest is the scientist, maybe the scientist, or maybe a politician. I'm not sure. You could argue that. So why are we seeing this reversal in academics and generally in secular society, where it's like, well, science leads to not the belief in God, whereas what reversal has happened?
I think there's a couple things that have happened, and obviously it's any conversation you have like this is going to be oversimplified. But you see this in two places, at least from my perspective. You see this with the rise of the Age of Enlightenment and this rejection of the supernatural. And this is a big thing in America's founding. A lot of the founding fathers are, if they're Christian at all, they're deists. They believe in the God that wound the clock and then let things go. There's some power that set things in order. But then after that, they don't believe in any kind of supernatural intervention. Thomas Jefferson famously edits the Bible and takes out all the miracles and things. Right. He liked the teachings of Jesus and so on, but he didn't like the miracles. So
walking on
those
water.
Pieces. Yeah, all these parts are cut out. So his gospel ends with Jesus being taken to a hill and crucified, and that's the end of the story. None of the other supernatural stuff happens. But this is all happening in enlightenment, in a reaction to the events of the previous century, where Europe tears itself apart in these gruesome, some of the worst fighting, bloody wars, and it's all using religion as a pretext for their political ambitions. You have the Protestant Reformation that creates the fractures in society because the church and the state are working together, and now with this new form of belief, it would be crass for me to kill you because I want your stuff. But if I want your stuff and you believe in the wrong version of God and you're leading people to hell, then you should be killed. And so this whole, the heretic hunting, the witch hunts, all of these things that spill over into, the 30 Years' War, where Europe is just an agony people. And so these Enlightenment thinkers look and they're like, this is not making sense. This religion thing is going to kill us all. Because people aren't being rational. They're arguing over their interpretation of this 2,000-year-old book. What's that about? And so they in response to that, they come up with other ways of explaining the world. They come up with it's very appealing. The Enlightenment's very appealing. We're going to rise above all these base arguments and things. The same thing then happens, and if you listen to what the new atheism, if you will, and I think that's actually the term some of them use. They'll tell you the same thing, that 9/11 was their moment of waking up and saying atheism is the new gospel. Because this religion thing is going to kill us all. This idea that rational people, because you have a different set of beliefs than me, that makes it worth killing you over. We've got to stamp this out. This is going to kill us all. And I think it's the same. I think it's the same response. Which is one of the reasons I find kingdom Christianity so compelling, is because our response to that is, you're reading the book wrong. You need to. The religion isn't supposed to have those outcomes. If your religious understanding is leading you to attack and fight and kill other people because they understand God differently than you, you've missed the very openings of Jesus' teaching. In Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and so on. And so I feel like the move from Pascal and his faith being so closely connected to his scientific pursuits was due to a change in society because of the way Christians, by and large, misused and missed the boat. And I think that's one of the reasons that I find, this idea of Jesus Christ as the king of a peaceful kingdom I know it's your line, no blood but our own is such a compelling response to that.
Graham confused that line
to that problem.
He did so.
Oh yeah. So that's I think that's the response that the world needs, and I do think the pendulum is swinging, and people are realizing materialism. The natural explanation, like there's something missing. Once again, we're getting back to there is something magical that's behind this. We don't understand necessarily what it is, but it's not pure mechanical knowledge is not enough to explain, what we see in the universe.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is really compelling to think about with Pascal's wager is something that I actually ran into teaching statistics here. There, Byron Smucker. Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't know if I'm allowed to share his name. Don't edit it out, but if you're listening, thanks for this, Byron. He gives a talk about basically certainty versus confidence in faith. And I think a lot of us are raised in this world where as soon as a doubt creeps into your faith, like it undoes. It's like an undoing. Mm-hmm. But with Pascal, he's very rational, and he's saying, hey, there's actually some likelihoods here.
Yeah.
That anytime you hear someone say, I'm 100% certain, I would just challenge you to be like, you can't be.
Right.
You can barely be 100% certain about anything.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of room for wiggle room there, but we approaching faith in terms of confidence levels as opposed to certainties is really, I think it's really, it opens the door for learning new information and then updating your belief system as you progress through life. And I'm not trying to be too like, oh, tomorrow you could wake up and learn that you're a cat or whatever. I'm not trying to go there.
No, I completely agree. And I think that's been something that's been super helpful for me in approaching some of the theological issues, even, some of the big thorny issues that, I grow up thinking, there's only one way to see this in the Bible, whether it's, the fate of the wicked or the whatever, the how exactly God brought the world into existence, and these are like major issues in the world. And to look and say, well, we can be reasonably confident. Like, I'm confident that God made the world. I'm less confident that it happened this way, and you can have different layers of confidence rather than it's like an all or nothing proposition. I'm either 100% right or everything is wrong.
Yeah, and I just, the line of thinking you're saying, I'm going to talk about this because I don't think I can get in trouble on my own podcast. Can I? No, I'm sure I can. I got a letter in the mail that basically reviewed the current events of the last year with Israel and Hamas, basically implored me to release a statement, a very binary statement. Either you support this side or you support this side. There's nothing there's nothing in the middle. And with our worldview, the one that I have fallen in that you kind of describe, you can't pitch binary choices to people like that, and just and have to say, hey, you have to side with this side or you have to side with this side, and if you don't, then you're basically a no good person who can't think. And this whole idea that the world isn't binary and you can there's this third way with Jesus, like, hey, well, maybe there's a way where I can still describe the political world and have rational thoughts about what's right and wrong and spectrums of evil and spectrums of good, while still saying the best way is to bow down to the Messiah and follow him, which neither of those two sides are doing. Anyway, that was a change. That was a very ambiguous. I'm not trying to be too detailed just in case I don't want to lose my presidency. Like other presidents have. Let's talk about something you mentioned earlier, and you said you're passionate about literacy, and I'd love to hear you talk about what that passion is and what it means to you. And
So basically, and I'll tell you a little bit of how I got into it, and it's the same way that Adam got into it. Really, my wife got me into it.
That Adam?
In the Bible, it's how you get into this. And he's like, well, my wife got me into it.
Got it.
But
Oh, God.
so we'd gotten married. We'd gotten married in 2010, and I was teaching school, and so I'm looking for something to do, as I like to say, to support my teaching habit. And so Trina's like, she's been involved in literacy and tutoring and things like that. And she tells me, she says this Susan Barton that she follows is she's a literacy guru, and she's going to be in Columbus, which is like 2 hours from us. And she said, I really, really want to go and be trained by her, because she knows how to. She can teach me how to screen for dyslexia and so on. And I it's something I've always been interested in, and this is an opportunity I don't want to miss. So it's like, I don't know. We just got married. We married 6 months. And she's talking about being gone a week, and I was like, And it was a lot of money, and especially you think about the hotel, because you're not going to drive 2 hours one way every day, so
right.
You have to get a hotel for those days and everything. And so we went back and forth about it. And she said, and then the idea came, well, why don't you come too? It's during the summer, so that's, it's not an issue with work schedule, because, I was doing something different in the summer. And so she's like talking to me to convince me, this is what we should do. And so I asked her, I said, do you think this is, she said, I think this is something big. I think this is something people need to know. No, I think if we learn this, there will be people out that we can use this as a side business, like I said, a sport teaching habit. And so I said, do you really believe in this? Because if you believe in it, it's good enough for me. And she said, yeah, I said, all right, let's do it. So we got the hotel for a week. We paid for 2 tickets for us, and it was a couple $1,000s, which is a lot. It's a lot of money for us now. It's definitely a lot of money for us just having gotten married. And we went, and about the second day of this 6-day seminar, we went back to the hotel, and I was just like, everybody needs to know this. Because she taught for more years than I had at that point.
Treva.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
She taught for, I actually have her beat now. She taught for 8, I taught for 9. So my first year when I took a sabbatical, and then we came back and taught again, and she taught the same year to keep us even. And then I taught one more year, so I guess I have her beat now. Except she's homeschooling Pascal, so I guess that should count, shouldn't it? So I guess we're still you.
The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world.
That's right. So
don't forget it, Graham.
So we look at this. This is describing students' behaviors. Like, as she's talking, students' names and faces are coming to mind. I'm like, wow, that's why so-and-so does that. That's why I deal with this in my classroom, because there's these underlying issues with reading that they don't understand. And it's like, it has this incredible explanatory power. I'm like, everybody needs to know this. Everybody needs to understand this. And so we started a business where we would travel to schools. I would talk to the community about dyslexia, what it is, how to recognize it, what you can do about it. And the Barton system, which is what we recommended, it's Susan Barton developed it, was designed for parents and tutors to be able to teach themselves. So you didn't have to go and get a lot of training. You could buy this program, and it would lay out from the very beginning like pre-literacy skills, and a student could go in a couple years from being basically very, very poor to no reading skills at all to being able to read at grade level. And we'd watch this over the course of it's been over 10 years now that we've been doing it. And we've watched students do this. We've watched children go through this process. And so seeing the difference that literacy makes in people's lives, and then realizing the importance of literacy culturally, and especially spending time in grad school. My initial stint in grad school was at Malone University, and I was studying to be an intervention specialist. So we're talking a lot about learning disabilities, and we're talking about then also, because I was pursuing teacher licensure, just some of the fundamental things about teaching, like literacy. And I hear a lot about this idea of a post-literate society, because, we don't need to be able to read books anymore, because we have, YouTube, and we have TikTok. You can bleep that word out in the post-edit. We have all these other these other forms that we don't need to be able to read anymore. And like, this is a really common idea. Like, we've like culturally grown past the need to read.
Do you mean that, like, actual reading? Because you still need to be able to read
you still
most of those tools. I've heard that you don't need to memorize anymore because you have instant access to, the internet with databases of information. But I'm not familiar with the literacy.
Yeah,
part of it.
Well, it's not so much. I don't think there's anybody out there saying you don't need to know how to read anymore. But it's like a functional illiteracy to actually have the mental space to pick up a book and read it without all the visual aids, without a running commentary and so on. Like, this whole thing is becoming a lost art, and the importance of literacy, however important you think literacy is, it's more important than that. It used to be that literacy means your ability to read and write your own name, and if you could do that, you were literate. And now, that there's like the UN is obviously looking at literacy as a way of raising the standard of living in the world. And so they define between strictly illiteracy and functional literacy, the ability to read and write a couple of sentences describing your personal life, the events of your day and so on. And what's interesting about illiteracy is, in many studies, because of the strong link between poverty, between homelessness, between a whole variety of societal ills, some of these things aren't measurable. And so if they find that they're not measurable, illiteracy matches it so closely that it can be used as a proxy number in studies to assume these other numbers. Schools, states will use reading scores, fourth grade reading scores, as part of their calculation for how many prison cells they're going to need as they think about what's the occupancy of our prison now, as opposed to, how many prison cells, we're going to build a new prison, how many cells should be in it. And they have these calculations to how many can we assume are going to, are
based on literacy.
And literacy is part of that calculation. And so for a lot of reasons, like the ability to pick up and read, or as Augustine, take up and read, the ability to do that is, it's more than just, moving your eyes across words. It's more than figuring it out. It's like a whole range of skills that changes somebody's life to be able to do. And that Jesus reveals himself to us as the Word. In the beginning was the Word. Veith, in his book Reading Between the Lines, which I highly recommend, it was one of the few textbooks that I read in my undergrad that I could barely put down. A lot of them I read because I wanted the reading grade, but this one I've read multiple times since then. That's my book recommendation, Reading Between the Lines. And he has a whole chapter called The Word versus the Image, and how God had prohibitions in the Old Testament. He's like, don't depict me. You don't know what I look like. Don't make pictures of me. I've revealed myself to you as a voice, as words. And he talks about how this understanding of God is still important, that we have this humanly, we have this love for images. We have like a desire for what can be pictured, and that there's something that's at odds between a picture and text. A picture is neither true or false; it just is, and that's advertising wouldn't work otherwise. You think about all the ads that you see and the implicit messages that they send. For instance, you have the well, they don't have them so much anymore, but when I was growing up, you had the Marlboro Cowboy, and he's smoking his cigarette, and then he's riding his horse out in the sunset and whatever. Well, excuse me. And the message of the ad is, if you want to be cool and manly, like this cowboy, then you should smoke our cigarettes. Now, when you say it out loud, it sounds silly. Like, of course, that doesn't make any sense. But they're not selling a truth claim. They're selling a feeling. They're selling something that it's an emotional claim.
Maybe we should get you into marketing here. I'm just kidding. No, I get where you're going with this, and
so literacy is the fight for literacy is a fight for clear thinking, if you will, the sound mind, as opposed to being ruled by our passions and ruled by our emotional selves and ruled by things that we respond to viscerally. It's like reading slows us down and think about what claims are being made here, what argument is being made here, what am I being told to believe in? It's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of viewing the world. I think we're losing it.
And so when you talk about literacy, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It's sort of this ability to sit down with a big idea in the form of a book usually, and digest it and know what that book said, as opposed to the sound bites.
Yeah,
informing ourselves with soundbite here, soundbite here, soundbite here, soundbite here.
Yeah,
I get it.
And when you think that this is probably the thing when I give a talk about literacy, this is the thing that blows my mind all the time. Because if you believe in inspiration, which I do, I believe that 2,000 years ago and longer, the Bible says in 1 Peter, holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit.
Right. And
so that if you imagine, how it must have been, Paul sitting down, Peter sitting down, and they're going to write a letter to their friends, and this, Peter or Paul or whoever, he's going to, to them, they were writing a letter. And yet the Holy Spirit somehow comes and does something, imbues this letter with something more. And so here's the apostles' thoughts. And then the Holy Spirit inspires those thoughts. So they're more than just a man's thoughts. They're man and God's thoughts. And he's writing these ideas down. And, the letter goes out and they read them. And they're now thinking the same thoughts that God gave the apostle. And then, it gets translated and it gets retranslated. And now today I pick up my Bible. And over 2,000 years ago, these thoughts that were given to Paul, I'm now thinking the same thoughts that were inspired by the Holy Ghost to Paul all those years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's the power of literacy. That's what literacy does, is it gives us that ability to connect over time and over place and across the centuries to those times when God revealed himself to his prophets through his inspiration. And ultimately, that's how Jesus, one of the terms Jesus used to reveal himself is in the beginning was the Word. And so, to me, that's the ultimate goal of literacy, is to provide that avenue that connects us with God's revelation through Christ.
Yeah, and I just want to throw a pitch out for Sattler because I'm allowed to, but in my college years, the number of books that I consumed start to finish to try to grasp an idea that were assigned to me was pretty small. Mm-hmm. I did have some professors do it, but our humanities program really has people trying to chew on some of these bigger works. Mm-hmm. And I would just wholeheartedly agree that this idea of being able to sit down with a big idea, look at it, spend time with it, consume it, understand its implications, it's just a general skill that we need. And if we can tie it to, it actually helps us understand God, because we understand God through through a little bit of literacy, at least somebody in our midst being literate. Yeah. I just throw that on. And I'd even say that when you look at people in history, I read a big biography of Abraham Lincoln, and he was from Kentucky. Have you ever read about him?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he was
studying by firelight and walking miles for a book.
And he would, every book he got a hold of, it would become his best friend. Mm-hmm. And there's stories of his room. He would scratch notes all over his room over and over again because he could only get access to one book at a time. Mm-hmm. And you think about that and the implications it had for I would just say his potential later was really high. And then later on in his presidency, get this, for a hobby, he once got a hold of the Euclid. Have you heard of the Euclid?
Yeah.
It's one of the original works of mathematics. He would just sit there at night and solve some problems in the Euclid just for kicks and giggles. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? Isn't that wild? And I'm as a president, that's wild. But it gets back to this idea of just being able to spend time with something.
Yeah.
And then I guess the one question I have to you is, I love pushing that on people, but I also have people in my life, the thought of sitting down with, I'll just say, if I were to hand them a book akin to something like How to Read a Book. Have you read that book?
I think so.
About how it's kind of how to become literate and really understand the arguments of text. It's a hard book to get through.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, it seems can we really prescribe that across humanity and Christianity, this idea of being purely academics? And are we all, how do you think about the different levels of people and their pursuit of, big ideas, and things
absolutely.
Like that?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to remember that for the first 1,500 years of Christianity, The majority of people were illiterate.
That's right.
And so they came to church partly to hear the Word of God read because that was the only access to it. Now, and so literacy is something that we can all take part in, but just the use of the word and understanding words, thinking in terms of language as opposed to images, I think is important. Given as you said, that the different levels, different people have different propensities. One of the things that I've often been frustrated by with this topic is people, well, all I need is the Bible. I need to read all these other books and you read the Bible. That's because if you can't understand literature and other books, how are you going to understand the book of books? I feel like all of our literary pursuits that are lesser. It's like to me saying that is akin to somebody in medical school saying, well, I don't want to operate on cadavers. I came to medical school to learn how to operate on people. Well, great. I mean, that's your ultimate point. But hopefully you can start with something that it doesn't hurt if you cut the wrong thing. And I think the same is true with our literary pursuits. If I'm reading a comic book or I'm reading some work of literature, if I'm reading something like Homer and I misunderstand what Homer had to say and I don't understand it completely or I understand the implications incorrectly, it doesn't make that big of a difference. But if I can practice those skills on the lesser works, hopefully I've honed my skills so when I come to the Word of God, I have a deeper understanding. So I don't think, in answer to your broader question, I don't think it's something we have to prescribe to everybody, but I think it's something we can call people to, and to the level right. that you're able, we should be looking at this pursuit of the Word as something that is, for all of us, is incumbent on us in some way to the level of our ability.
Yeah, I guess what I was hoping to get at is that there's some sort of danger of becoming a hyper-intellectual
for
people
sure.
who can't relate to the people around us. Mm-hmm. And I do think that there's somewhat of a danger where we're like, it's all about literacy, it's all about reading and these things. But I just want people to know that I don't think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, it's definitely not what I'm getting at. And like I said, the thing that I often come back to when I start being tempted to go that way is, as I said, for 1,500 years, most people couldn't if they could read it, they couldn't afford to own it.
Right.
And so then the importance is the word is still important, but you can be a good Christian and not know how to read or not be of the propensity to be able to read, the deep book or so on. Absolutely.
Well, I'll wrap up with a couple of questions here. One, I always talk about pearls. We have this moment, pearls of wisdom. Is there generally a pearl of wisdom that you like to talk about with people that has shaped you? I've heard a couple in the stories you've shared, but anything else that you like to talk about?
I have three great truths that I call them the three great truths, and they're not the only truths, but they're ones that I need to be reminded of. And they're kind of tied together. The first one is, the prudent man foresees the evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Most of the time, the problems that you're going to encounter in your life are things you could have foreseen if you would have been paying attention. And the second is like unto the first, which is your success in life is in direct proportion to the number of uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have. And I've looked at myself and said that to myself different times when I've been dreading a conversation. Look, we need to talk about this. Because if you can foresee what's going to happen and you realize, oh, this is a conversation we need to have with him, and it's not going to be enjoyable, it's not going to be happy and fun times. But the more you're willing to push yourself to have those tough conversations, the more successful you're going to be in your relationships, whether it's your relationships in the workplace, whether it's your relationships, in the brotherhood of believers, or with your family, with your wife, wherever. Being willing to have the uncomfortable conversations is going to dramatically improve your success in life. And then something my father would say all the time when I was growing up, probably if you would ask me, what's the thing, that you'll learn from your dad, it would be, you don't have to condemn everybody, but you don't have to join everybody. And I think that's a really easy thing, especially as Christians. We're trying to figure out, what does God want for me? And it can be easy. Well, they're doing it, so it must be okay. Well, maybe they are, and maybe it's okay for them, but you don't have to look at them and say, well, what they're doing is definitely wrong. But that doesn't mean it's right for you. You have to look for yourself at where you are. And so it's been something that's been a really good guiding principle for my life, is looking and just saying, I need to decide what works for me and where I am in life. What is God trying to teach me? Where has God placed me? And I can do that and gain insights from other people without simply thinking, oh, if they're doing it, then that must be something I should do too, or that must be okay for me.
Yeah, when I teach the third one there, when I teach peacemaking, I write down at the beginning of the class, one of the skills, and I mean skills, virtues, is you need to learn how to turn observations into questions, not judgments, because it's a very similar thing where you see people and you can either judge or you can ask a question, which actually bleeds into your second. Are you willing to actually understand people? I love those. You call them the 3 truths?
Yeah, 3 great truths.
All right. 3 great truths. Maybe we need to do a separate episode on that. No, I'm just kidding. And then the last question I'll ask before just like the final, anything else. Is there anything you consume on a regular basis in terms of maybe recommendable content to the audience that you think is beneficial for people to check out?
If you're a history buff, there's a YouTube channel called Montemayor.
How do you spell that?
Montemayor.
Okay.
And it's not a very big channel. I've got maybe 15 or 20 videos on it tops. And it is some of the most interesting historical content I've ever seen. He does really in-depth descriptions. And one of the things that's really neat is he has one of the Battle of Midway. And he has animations to show what the different ships did in the planes and so on. And then at times he'll pause his animations and fade in a photo that was taken during the battle, and all the ships are where they're supposed to be and all the planes and everything. But he's just does it apparently just for fun. It's something he enjoys doing. His channel's not monetized or anything, but his videos are always an instant watch for me. I'm subscribed to his channel, and I absolutely love his in-depth coverage. I think it's a perfect example of somebody that's just doing something for the joy of doing it. As far as other recommendations, everybody should read Black Duck. Black Duck is probably my most recommended book. It's a young adult book, and I had the privilege of meeting the author last year. She invited me to come down to her community, and she showed me around the setting of the book. I got to visit most of the places where stuff happened in the book, and unfortunately, she passed away actually in October. So if I hadn't had the chance to do it,
didn't she interact with some?
She came and did a guest lecture for a class last year. But it's such I could do a whole podcast on Black Duck. I've read it. I can't tell you how many times I've read it. I cry almost every time I read it. It's a really moving book about friendship, about relationships, about secrets. How our lives affect one another.
By Janet Lyle.
Janet Taylor Lyle, yeah.
Janet Taylor Lyle.
So I highly recommend it. It's been a really formative book for me. For a Christian read, I recommend Paul Among the People by Sarah Rudin.
One more time.
Paul Among the People.
Oh yeah.
She's a classical scholar. She reads Greek and Latin as a academic. And she got interested one day as a Christian. What would it be like? What would it have been like for these Greek and Roman poets that I read every day for my academic work? What if one of them had picked up Paul's letters? What would he have thought? What would it have sounded like to him? What would it have meant in his culture? And she had took a very dim view of Paul. She said one of her professors referred to the Apostle Paul as Paul Grumpy Pants, and this view that Jesus had all the fun teachings and it was all great and wonderful. Then Paul came around along and ruined it all. Very progressive kind of idea. And she said, that's what I thought. I read Paul and I liked some of the stuff he said, and he seemed kind of grumpy. So, and she said, I started reading it and I was like, wow, what this would have meant. This was like dynamite in first century Rome, first century Greek culture. And so she lays that out. So she hits all the hot button topics. She hits women's roles. She has a whole chapter in the head covering, which is worth the price of the whole book. She has a chapter on slavery in the Roman Empire and what it meant and what the culture around it was like. The household of faith and how Christian community was this alternative to the Roman household system, and there was this desire in Roman culture to be part of a household, to matter, and that the church offered an opportunity to enter a household that wasn't a household that you had to be born into or be lucky enough. It was something you could enter by faith, and how earth-shaking this idea of a community of believers. Anyway, every one of the chapters is worth the price of the whole book, and it's like You can get it on Amazon for like $10. So at that price, it's bad stewardship not to, really.
All right, good. And that's by Sarah Rudin.
Sarah Rudin, yeah.
Somehow it's on my list, but I haven't read it yet. But yeah, I'm sure it's because you have talked about it before. And then lastly, is there anything else that you want to mention at the end of the conversation before we close out here?
No, I think it's been a super enjoyable conversation.
Me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, at the end here, the date's coming up. So we have an open up house coming up, and that is, I should have this memorized here.
March 21st or something?
March 21st is an open house. It's a Friday, Saturday. And so if you're interested in Sattler, open house is awesome. We come and spend a day on campus, and then we do some Boston-based things. And that's what we didn't talk about is Boston.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I'll show you around Boston.
Dave will show you around Boston and his list of things there. I just heard you trying to recruit someone to the MFA.
That's right.
He does it all the time. And then March 15th is our international student deadline, which is really important. We have students from 5 continents here right now, which is phenomenal. You've been a huge part of that. And we're hoping, I have a goal to get every livable continent someday.
Great.
Actually, 4 continents. I take it back. Yeah, 4 continents. We're missing 2. 2 livable ones. All right. Thanks so much, Dave, for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.